Have you ever really thought about the menstrual cycle? I mean, it's not just some random monthly event. It's actually one of the most precise biological processes in the human body. And get this, it's not just happening in the ovaries. The whole thing is being run, meticulously timed, from the command center of the brain. Which brings us to the big question for today. How in the world does that happen? How can a process that takes about 28 days to unfold end with an event like ovulation that's timed almost down to the hour? It's a seriously fascinating biological puzzle. Well, the answer is this incredible, complex symphony of feedback loops. It's basically a constant chemical conversation happening between the brain and the ovaries. So to really get a handle on it, we're going to build a model together, piece by piece, to see exactly how this amazing system works. So here's our game plan. We're going to start with a chain of command, from the brain down to the ovaries. Then we'll introduce the chemical messengers they use to communicate. After that, we'll uncover this kind of paradoxical switch that triggers ovulation, see how the uterus gets ready, and finally look at how all this knowledge lets us, well, hack the system. All right, first things first, the command chain. This whole process is run by something called the Hypothalamic-Pituitary-Gonadal Axis, or, HPG Axis for short. It's a top-down system, a direct line of communication between the brain and the ovaries. Let's think of it like an orchestra, right? At the very top, you've got the hypothalamus in the brain. That's the conductor, the one setting the tempo. It sends signals down to the pituitary gland, which is also in the brain. The pituitary is like the orchestra's leader. And then, the pituitary directs the ovaries, the orchestra itself, telling them which hormones to play and exactly when to play them. So how do all these parts actually talk to each other? They use chemical messengers called hormones. This is literally the language of this system, letting these signals travel all through the bloodstream to coordinate what's happening in completely different parts of the body. And what you see here is a perfect loop. The hypothalamus releases GnRH, which talks to the pituitary. The pituitary then releases FSH and LH, which talk to the ovaries. And then the ovaries release estradiol, which travels all the way back up to talk to the brain again. This communication circuit, this feedback loop, is the absolute key to the entire thing. Now, for most of the cycle, the system is running on something called negative feedback. Just think of it like the thermostat in your house. When the temperature, or in this case estradiol levels, gets a little too high, it signals the brain to chill out and release less of its signal. This keeps everything in a really stable, balanced state. It's basically the system's cruise control. But then, something totally wild happens. Once per cycle, the entire system breaks its own #1 rule. This is the plot twist, the moment everything changes and makes ovulation possible. And right here, you can see the paradox in action. The system, which has been using rising estrogen as a brake for weeks, suddenly does a 180. A sustained, really high level of estrogen doesn't tap the brake anymore. It slams on the accelerator, telling the brain to release way more signal, not less. The research papers themselves use the word paradoxically, and it's just the perfect word for it. Scientists have been fascinated by this for ages, how the exact same hormone, estradiol, can have two totally opposite effects on the brain. For weeks, it's saying, slow down, but for one critical moment, it screams, go. This is the main event of the whole cycle. So what is it that lets the system hit the accelerator? The secret is a special group of neurons in the hypothalamus that produce a chemical called kisspeptin. These neurons are uniquely sensitive to really high levels of estradiol. So when estrogen gets high enough for long enough, it's these kisspeptin neurons that flip the switch, triggering a massive release of the brain's starting signal. They are the master switch for ovulation. And the result of all this positive feedback? A colossal spike in what's called luteinizing hormone, or LH, from the pituitary. And I'm not talking a small increase here. We call this the LH surge. It's this massive game-changing tidal wave of hormone. And it's this surge that travels to the ovary and gives it that final powerful push it needs to release an egg. And if that wasn't cool enough, here's the final layer of mind-blowing control. This whole event is regulated by the brain's master 24-hour clock, this tiny little region in the hypothalamus. It basically acts like a gatekeeper, making sure that the LH surge can only happen during a very specific window of time, which is usually in the late afternoon. This is what gives it that incredible hour-by-hour precision. Okay, so the brain has kicked off ovulation with pinpoint accuracy. But what's the point of all this? Well, the ultimate goal is to get the uterus ready for a potential pregnancy. All those hormonal signals we just talked about are perfectly synchronized with changes happening in the uterine lining, which is called the endometrium. So, right after menses, that rising estrogen we saw earlier is driving what's called the proliferative phase. It's rebuilding the uterine lining. Then, after that big LH surge causes ovulation, the ovary starts making a new hormone, progesterone. This kicks off the secretory phase, making that thickened lining sticky and receptive, creating the perfect environment for a fertilized egg to implant. So now that we've built this whole intricate model, we can actually see how it's possible to influence it. Understanding these feedback loops is everything. And it's the core science behind technologies like hormonal contraception. It is a perfect example of hacking this super delicate system. So here's the crucial point. Hormonal contraceptives work by giving the body a steady, low dose of synthetic hormones. And that's just enough to keep the system locked in that negative feedback state. It keeps the brake gently pressed down all the time. By doing that, it never lets your natural estrogen reach that super high peak that's needed to hit the accelerator. No accelerator means no LH surge, and if you don't have an LH surge, ovulation just doesn't happen. I mean, when you just step back and look at the whole model, it is truly remarkable. You have a top-down command chain, a paradoxical feedback loop that can flick from a brake to an accelerator, and a master clock timing the whole thing down to the hour. The system is the result of millions of years of evolution, and it really leaves us with a final thought. What does this level of biological complexity and coordination truly reveal about the nature of life itself?